My name is Claire Voss. I'm 38 years old, and I bought my house with 10 years of night shifts, skipped vacations, and a savings account I treated like a second religion. Last spring, my mother sat across from me at my own kitchen table, in the house I own, drinking coffee from a mug I bought, and told me I should sign it over to my brother because he had children and I didn't. She said it the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. She said it like it was obvious, like the math was simple, like the decade I'd spent building something from nothing was a minor detail that could be overwritten by someone else's family planning decisions. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I set my mug down very carefully and I said, "Tell me more about what you mean by that." And she did. And that was the moment I understood that some conversations don't end the way they begin, and some families only show you what they really think of you when they decide they want something you have. What happened over the next 6 weeks cost my family $340,000, a real estate attorney they hadn't expected, and the story they'd been telling themselves for 30 years. Welcome to Silent Drama Stories, the channel where the people who were always told to be reasonable finally stop being reasonable and start being right. If you have ever worked for something and watched someone assume it was already theirs, drop a comment below and tell me what they wanted. And if stories about quiet people who finally stop being quiet are your thing, subscribe, because this one is going to stay with you. Let me take you back to the beginning, not last spring, the real beginning, because you need to know who I was before that kitchen table conversation, and you need to know who my brother was, and you need to understand the particular geography of a family that has one child it invests in and one child it withdraws from, because none of what happened makes sense without that map. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Ohio, the second of 2 children. My brother Derek is 4 years older than me. We shared a house, 2 parents, and almost nothing else, because from the time I was old enough to notice, we lived in very different versions of that house. Derek was funny and loud and easy to love in the way that some people are, the way that fills a room and makes parents proud at dinner parties. He played baseball through high school. He had friends over constantly. He was the kind of kid teachers remember. I was the other kind. Quiet, bookish, good at things that didn't translate well to conversations at the grocery store. I got straight A's in subjects my parents couldn't explain to their friends. I won a regional science competition at 15, and my mother's response was to ask if there had been many other kids competing, as if the victory needed to be sized down before it could be accepted. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this because this pattern, this particular architecture of one child who is celebrated and one who is managed, it matters. It explains everything that came later. The body remembers the house it grew up in. And I grew up in a house where Derek's needs were the weather and my needs were an inconvenience. When Derek needed help with his car at 19, my parents co-signed the loan. When I needed help with my first apartment deposit at 22, my mother said I should have planned better. When Derek got laid off at 26 and needed somewhere to stay, he moved back home for 14 months, and my parents converted the basement into a proper studio for him. When I went through a rough patch at 25 and asked if I could stay in my old room for 8 weeks while I sorted my finances, my mother said they had plans to repaint it. I want to be precise about something. I don't think my parents were cruel people. I think they were people who had decided early on, maybe without even fully realizing it, that Derek needed protecting and I needed managing. That he was the kind of person life would be hard for, and I was the kind of person who would figure it out. Being capable was my identity in that family, which meant being capable was also my punishment, because it gave them permission to look away. So I figured it out. That's what I did for 20 years. I figured it out quietly, alone, without asking anyone for anything, because I had learned early that asking only highlighted how little was freely offered. I went into nursing, not because it was glamorous or because it made people at parties ask follow-up questions, but because I was good at it and it paid well if you were willing to work nights, and I was willing, because I didn't have anyone asking me to come home at a reasonable hour. I worked nights for 7 years at a regional hospital. I picked up extra shifts during the holidays. I packed lunches. I drove a car with 200,000 miles on it because the money I saved on a car payment went into an account I checked every Sunday morning the way some people check church attendance. By the time I was 33, I had enough for a down payment. Not a small house, not a starter home in a compromised neighborhood. A real house. 4 bedrooms, a yard with 2 oak trees, a kitchen with actual counter space, in a neighborhood where the schools were good even though I didn't have children in them, because I understood that school districts affect property values, and I had read enough to know that a house is only an asset if you treat it like one. I bought it in October. I closed alone, which means I sat at that table with the attorney and the stack of papers and the pen, and I signed my name 37 times without anyone beside me, and I drove home to a house that was mine, and I stood in the empty living room and I cried, not the sad kind, the other kind, the kind that happens when something you built with your own hands is finally real. I didn't throw a party. I didn't make an announcement. I told my parents and Derek matter-of-factly, the way I told them most things, the way you report information to people who will acknowledge it and move on. My mother said that was nice and asked if I was seeing anyone. Derek said congratulations in a text with a house emoji. That was October. I spent the next 5 years making that house into something. I repainted every room myself. I planted the garden. I refinished the floors in the dining room over a long weekend with a belt sander I rented and a tutorial I watched 40 times. I built the raised garden beds in the back. I put in the shelving in the garage. I know every wall of that house the way you know a person you've spent years with, because I built my life in it one careful Saturday at a time. When the market shifted and the neighborhood appreciated, I didn't do anything flashy. I just kept paying the mortgage, kept maintaining the house, kept being the person who shows up and does the work. By last spring, the house was worth considerably more than I'd paid for it. I knew this because I am the kind of person who tracks these things. The neighborhood had come up. 3 houses on my street had sold in the past year at prices that made the original purchase feel almost accidental in its prescience. The house was worth, at current market estimates, approximately $490,000. I had paid $318,000 and change for it 5 years earlier, and I had put in another $40,000 in improvements, carefully documented, because I am the kind of person who documents things. I say all of this so that, when I tell you what my mother asked me to do with it, you understand exactly what she was asking. Derek had kids, 3 of them. His oldest was 7, the twins were 4. His wife, Sasha, was warm and chaotic and genuinely overwhelmed in the way of a person who loves her life but can't quite keep up with the administrative requirements of it. I liked Sasha. I still like Sasha. This isn't about Sasha. Derek and Sasha were renting a house in a suburb about 40 minutes from me. The landlord had given them notice. He was selling, which meant they needed to find somewhere else, which meant they were now house hunting in a market that had become, over the past several years, genuinely brutal for buyers who didn't have substantial equity going in. I understood their situation. I felt for them. 3 kids, a tight timeline, a market that wasn't cooperating. That's genuinely hard. I had no argument with the difficulty of their situation. What I had an argument with was the solution my mother proposed. She called on a Wednesday evening in March. She said she needed to talk to me about something important, and could she come over Saturday? I said yes, which is the thing I always say when my mother asks for something before she's told me what it is, because there's always a moment where you choose between the old habit and the new self, and that evening I chose the old habit. She came Saturday morning. She arrived at 9:30 with a bakery box and a practiced calm that I now recognize as the particular composure of someone who has pre-rehearsed what they're about to say. She set the box on my kitchen counter and asked if there was coffee, which there was, because it was my kitchen and I'm a nurse who works long shifts and there is always coffee. We sat down. She looked around the kitchen the way she'd started looking around my house recently, differently than she used to, with an assessing quality I hadn't named yet but felt. Then she folded her hands on the table and said, in a voice pitched carefully to sound like a reasonable adult proposing a reasonable thing, that she had been thinking about Derek and Sasha's situation. I said I had too. She said it was hard, with 3 children, to be looking for housing in this market. I agreed that it was. She said that she and my father had been talking, and they felt that what would really help the family, meaning Derek's family, was stability. A permanent place. Something with a yard for the kids. And they had been thinking, she said, tilting her head the way she does when she's about to say something she has decided to present as obvious, that my house would be really perfect for them. I waited. She continued. She said that Derek and Sasha had 3 children. She said children needed space and roots and a good school district. She said that I was single, no children, and that the house was, frankly, quite large for one person. She said she understood it was a big ask, but family helps family, and she thought that perhaps I might consider letting Derek and Sasha take over the house. Maybe they could pay me something, she said, gesturing loosely with her hand as if the specific number was a minor detail. Or maybe we could look at other arrangements. She said she was sure we could figure something out. She said it like the house was a spare room I'd been using for storage. I looked at my mother across my kitchen table. I looked at the bakery box she'd brought, which was a thing she did when she needed something. I understood in that moment, not a thing she did when she wanted to give something. I thought about the 37 signatures. I thought about the 7 years of night shifts. I thought about the Saturday I spent on my hands and knees refinishing the dining room floor while my lower back screamed at me, and the Sunday mornings I checked the savings account balance like a prayer. I said, "Tell me more about what you mean by that." And she told me more. And the more she told me, the clearer the picture became, because my mother is not a strategic person. She is an emotional person who plans in feelings rather than logistics, which means when you ask her to elaborate, she elaborates past the point of her own position. She told me that Derek was really struggling. She told me that it wasn't fair that the market was so hard for young families. She told me that I had no children to think about. She told me that I was practical and adaptable and that I could find somewhere else. She told me that it would mean so much to Derek. She told me that this was what family did for each other. She did not tell me what Derek had done for me, because there was nothing to tell. When she finished, I said I would think about it. She smiled and looked relieved and reached for a pastry from the bakery box, and we talked about other things for 40 minutes, and she left at 11:30, and I closed the door behind her, and I stood in my front hall in the house I had built with 10 years of my own labor, and I felt something clarify inside me the way things clarify when they finally stop being complicated and become simple. The answer was no. But the answer was going to need some company, because I understood, standing in that hallway, that my mother had not come to ask me. My mother had come to tell me what had already been decided, and to give me the opportunity to agree gracefully. And the difference between those two things, between being asked and being managed into compliance, was the whole architecture of my relationship with my family, and I was done living in that architecture. So I said nothing, and I made some calls. The first call I made was to a real estate attorney named Patricia Reyes, whose name I had gotten from a colleague at work who had navigated a complicated property situation the previous year. I called Patricia on Monday morning, before my shift, standing in my car in the hospital parking lot with 20 minutes before I needed to be inside. I told her what my mother had proposed. I told her about the house's current value, the mortgage balance, what I'd put into improvements. I told her about my family dynamic in the efficient summary of someone who has processed these things privately for years. Patricia listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, she said, "What do you want to happen?" I said I wanted to make sure my house stayed my house, and I wanted to understand what my actual options were, and I wanted to know if there was anything I should be doing that I wasn't already doing. She said we should meet. We met Thursday. Patricia was a small woman in her mid-50s who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in precise sentences. Her office had a real plant in the corner that looked genuinely well cared for, which told me something about her. She had reviewed everything I'd sent her ahead of the meeting, which told me more. She walked me through the legal landscape in clear terms. The house was mine, titled in my name alone, with no co-signers and no family loans attached, because I had been careful about that from the beginning, by instinct more than strategy. There was no legal mechanism by which my family could compel me to do anything with it. That was the simple part. The more complex part was what Patricia called the informal pressure campaign. She'd seen it before. A family decides what should happen with an asset, presents it to the owner as a foregone conclusion, and then uses emotional leverage, guilt, appeals to fairness, collective family opinion, to wear down the resistance until compliance feels easier than continued conflict. The campaign could last months. It could involve multiple family members coming at you from different angles. It could involve framing your refusal as selfishness, cruelty, or a betrayal of family values. She said the best thing I could do was document everything, respond in writing where possible, and be extremely clear about my position so that there was no room for the family narrative to reframe my no as a maybe. I asked her if she thought that was what was coming. She looked at me over her reading glasses. She said, based on what I'd told her, she thought what was coming had probably already been planned for longer than the conversation at my kitchen table suggested. I sat with that on the drive home. My father called on Tuesday evening. My father, Gerald Voss, is a man who has spent 40 years as a high school history teacher and another 20 years being managed by my mother. And the combination has produced a person who is genuinely kind and genuinely useless in moments of family conflict, because he has long since outsourced his opinions on difficult subjects to whoever is standing closest to him. He said he understood my mother had talked to me about Derek's situation. I said she had. He said it was something the family had been thinking about for a while. He said Derek was in a tough spot. He said kids needed stability. He said he and my mother had always hoped the family could support each other. I said that was a nice sentiment. He said he thought it was worth considering seriously. I asked him if Derek knew about this plan. A brief pause. He said Derek knew they were looking at options. I asked what options Derek had been looking at for himself. A longer pause. He said Derek was working on it. I said that was good to hear, and I said I was thinking about everything carefully, and I said I had to get some sleep before my night shift. He said of course, and we hung up. I made a note of the call. Date, time, content. Patricia had told me to do that. 2 days later, Derek called. This was less expected. Derek and I talked maybe 6 times a year, mostly on birthdays and at Christmas, the obligatory frequency of siblings who have never been particularly close. His voice on the phone had the particular brightness of someone who has been coached on how to start a difficult conversation. He asked how I was doing. I said fine. He said the house search was really tough and laughed a little, the short, nervous laugh of a man who knows he's about to ask for something enormous and is hoping the laugh will sand off the edges. He said he guessed I'd talked to Mom. I said I had. He said he knew it was a big thing to ask. He said he didn't want me to feel pressured. He said Sasha and the kids were just really struggling with the uncertainty. He talked about his oldest, Lily, who had been having anxiety about moving schools. He talked about the twins and how disruptive a chaotic living situation was for 4-year-olds. He talked about Sasha's stress levels and her back pain and the way the whole thing was affecting their marriage. He talked about his family for 11 minutes. He did not ask how I was doing in any way that waited for an answer. Then he said, very carefully, that he thought what Mom was suggesting made a lot of sense. He said it wasn't like he expected it for free. He said they'd worked out some numbers. He said they could pay me something monthly, like rent, but between family. He named a number that was roughly 40% of market rental value. I said I would think about it. He said he appreciated it. He said I had always been the practical one in the family. He said he knew I'd figure out something that worked. He said it like my practicality was a trait the family had generously allowed me to develop, rather than a survival mechanism I'd constructed because the alternative was drowning. I hung up and opened the note on my phone and added the call. Here is the thing I want to say clearly, because I think it matters before I tell you what came next. I was not at any point in this process angry at Derek for wanting stability for his children. Children deserve stability. Families in a brutal housing market deserve compassion. The desire to have a safe, permanent place to raise your kids is one of the most legitimate desires a person can have. What I was with increasing precision and clarity, was finished. Finished being the practical one who figures it out. Finished being the capable one who can adapt. Finished being the family member who is assumed to need less, want less, feel less, because she has never made her needs loud enough to inconvenience anyone. I had built something. I had built it with my own hands and my own money and my own 10 years of night shifts and careful Sundays, and my family had looked at what I'd built, and their first thought was how useful it could be to someone else. My grandmother had a saying. She was my father's mother, a woman who raised 4 kids on a teacher's salary and never asked anyone for anything. She used to say that love and entitlement feel identical from the outside until the moment something is refused, and then you find out which one it was. I was about to find out. I called Patricia on a Friday morning and I told her I was ready. I told her what I wanted to do, not just with the house, but with the conversation and with the family dynamic I had been living in for 38 years. She listened. She made some notes. She said she thought it was a solid plan and that I should give her until the following Wednesday. The following Wednesday, she called me back with everything I needed. I made 2 more calls that weekend. One to my friend Renata, who is an accountant and who had been listening to this situation unfold for weeks with the barely contained outrage of someone who understands what numbers actually mean. She gave me some specific information I needed. The other call was to my father's younger brother, my Uncle Thomas, who is the one member of my extended family who has never treated me like a utility, and who said, when I told him what had been asked of me, something that I wrote down and have not thrown away. He said, "Claire, the only people who tell you that you don't need what you built are the people who want it." My mother called on a Monday morning, 3 weeks after the kitchen table conversation. She called at 8, which meant she had been awake thinking about this, or had been told by Derek to push again, or both. She started with weather. She asked about my sleep schedule. She asked if I'd been eating properly, which is a thing she asks when she wants something, a maternal coating over the ask that makes it harder to deflect without seeming ungrateful. Then she said she wanted to know if I'd given more thought to what they'd discussed. I said I had given it a great deal of thought. She said she was glad to hear that. I said I had also spoken with a real estate attorney. A pause, the pause of someone recalibrating. She said, oh, she didn't think it needed to go that far. It was a family conversation. I said I found it helpful to understand the full picture before making decisions about my property. I said that as a result of those conversations, I had a clearer sense of what I wanted to do, and I thought we should all get together so I could share it, because I wanted everyone to hear it at the same time. She said that sounded like a lot of formality for a family discussion. I said I thought it made sense, given what was being discussed. I said I was free Sunday afternoon and I would host. She agreed, in the way people agree when they're not sure what's coming, but are confident enough in the outcome they've scripted that they don't see the reason to object. She said she would tell Derek and Sasha. I said that would be great. I spent Sunday morning cooking, because I am the kind of person who needs something to do with my hands when something important is about to happen, and because feeding people at my table was a thing I could do in my own house, for what might be the last time any of them came to it without understanding what it actually was. They arrived at 2. My parents first, my mother in the particular outfit she wears when she is performing reasonableness. Derek and Sasha arrived 10 minutes later with Lily and the twins. The twins ran around the living room for 4 minutes before Sasha got them settled with some snacks at the kitchen table. Lily sat quietly and read something on her tablet. She was a serious, beautiful child who looked more like Derek than anyone and had her mother's careful eyes. I had set out coffee and food. I sat down last, and there was a moment where everyone settled, and my mother looked at me with the expectant expression of a woman who has decided the trajectory of a meeting and is waiting for the meeting to confirm her prediction. I said I had thought a lot about what they'd asked me, and that I wanted to share where I'd landed, and that I had some information I thought was important for the whole family to have. Derek leaned forward slightly. Sasha was watching me. My father had his hands around his coffee mug. I said I would not be signing over or selling the house to Derek and Sasha, or entering into any informal arrangement regarding the property. My mother's expression shifted. I said that wasn't the end of what I wanted to share, and I asked them to hear me out before responding. I had prepared a folder, 3 copies. Patricia's office had printed them. I set one in front of my parents, one in front of Derek, and kept one for myself. I said I'd spent some time looking at what had been asked of me, and that I wanted to put it in context. The first page was a simple financial summary. It showed the house's purchase price, the mortgage payments made over 5 years, the documented improvement costs, and the current estimated market value. It showed, in clean numbers, that I had built approximately $215,000 in equity in this property, not counting improvements, through my own income and my own payments and my own decisions. My mother started to say something. I said, gently, that I had asked them to let me finish, and that it would take just a few more minutes. The second page was something Renata had helped me put together. It was a summary of the financial contributions I had made to my family over the past 12 years. Not accusations, not a grievance list, numbers. The car loan I'd helped my mother refinance when I was 24, the interest I'd eaten when she'd paid back only the principal, the money I'd lent Derek when he was between jobs at 29 and had never discussed again. The cost of every flight I'd taken home for family events over the years, because I always flew home, and Derek, who lived 40 minutes away, often did not make it to things outside his immediate orbit. Small amounts and large ones, 12 years of being the capable one. The total was not $215,000. It was not that dramatic, but it was $47,000, and it was documented, and it sat on the page in the same clean font as everything else, and it said something that I had never once said out loud. I said I wasn't presenting this to demand repayment or to assign blame. I said I was presenting it because I thought it was important for everyone to have the same information when we talked about what was fair and what family looked like. My father had not moved. He was reading the second page with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was not anger. It was something quieter and more uncomfortable than that. It was recognition. Derek said my name. His voice was careful. I said, let me share the last thing. The third page was a letter, not from Patricia, though she had reviewed it. From me. I had written it over 2 evenings, alone in the house. At the dining room table I had refinished myself, and I had rewritten it 4 times until it said exactly what I meant without a single word more. It said that I loved my family, that I was not doing this out of resentment or spite, but out of something that had taken me a long time to name: self-respect. It said that I had built this house for myself, not because I didn't want family, but because family had not been something I could count on in the ways that mattered when it was hard. It said that I had watched for 38 years as my needs were treated as optional, and my capabilities were treated as a resource, and that I had done the thing capable people do, which was to absorb it without complaint, until the complaint became unavoidable. It said that I was not refusing to help Derek because I didn't love him or his children. I was refusing because what had been asked of me was not help. It was transfer. My asset, my decade, my future security, relocated to a different member of the family because someone had looked at my life and decided it was available. It said that going forward, I was happy to be a family member who showed up for events, who was a loving aunt to Lily and the twins, who maintained real relationships built on genuine reciprocity. But I was not available to be the family's load-bearing wall anymore. That role had been quietly assigned to me at birth, and I was resigning from it with this letter, and I hoped they would read it not as a door closing, but as a window opening, the window onto what it might look like to know each other honestly. I sat back. The room was quiet. In a way, rooms are quiet when something has shifted in them. Sasha was the first to speak. She said, and her voice was low and not unkind, she said she hadn't known about a lot of that. She looked at the second page. She said Derek hadn't told her about the loan. Derek looked at the table. She said she was sorry, and I believed her because Sasha has never been the problem. Sasha is someone who fell in love with a man who had been cushioned from consequences his whole life, and she was now living with the results of that cushioning, and she was decent enough to see it when it was shown to her plainly. My mother said my name. Her voice had the tight quality of someone choosing each word carefully because the room doesn't have the audience she expected. She said she felt this was an overreaction. I said I understood why it felt that way from where she was sitting. She said she had only been trying to help Derek. I said I knew, and that was, I said, exactly what the letter was about. My father said nothing for a long time. Then he said, quietly, looking at the second page still in his hands, that he hadn't realized about the money. He said that. In 40 years of knowing my father, it was the closest he had ever come to admitting the particular shape of the imbalance. Derek said, eventually, that he needed some time to think about all of this. I said, of course. He picked up his folder and held it without looking at it, and he looked at me across the table, and I saw something in his face that I don't know how to fully name. It was not anger, or not only anger. It was more like the look of someone who has just learned that the floor of a room they've been standing on comfortably their whole life is made of a different material than they thought. He had never once been asked to see our history from my side of it. In 38 years, no one had ever put the numbers on a table. People who are cushioned don't need to look at the numbers because the numbers have always worked out in their favor and they've been told that's just how things are. Now the numbers were on the table, and they told a different story than the one he'd been living in. They left at 4. The twins had fallen asleep in the car. Lily, on her way out, looked up from her tablet and said goodbye to me with a seriousness that suggested she understood more than a 7-year-old should have to. I closed the door. I stood in my front hall, in the house I had built, which was still my house, and I listened to it be quiet around me. My phone rang at 6. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was 2 minutes of things I had heard before in different configurations. That I was being selfish, that Derek had children, that family doesn't keep score, that she was very hurt. I listened to all of it and deleted it and made a note in the log. She called again at 8. I let that one go too. Derek texted at 9:15. It was short. It said, "I'm going to need some time. I don't know how to respond to all of that yet." I wrote back, "That's okay. I'm not going anywhere." I meant it 2 ways. Here is what happened after, because I know you want to know. My mother did not speak to me for 3 weeks. Then she called one evening, and the call was different from the ones before, quieter, without the practiced warmth or the practiced hurt. She said she had reread the letter. She said she didn't agree with all of it, but she said there were things in it she hadn't wanted to see, and that she was sorry it had taken this to make her see them. It was not a full apology. It was a partial one, imperfect and small, the kind that costs a person something. I accepted it the way you accept a partial thing, without pretending it was whole, but without refusing it either. My father called a week later. He called on a Tuesday morning, which was not his pattern, and he said he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said he wished he had seen the second page a long time ago, meaning he wished he had been paying enough attention to produce the second page himself without me having to. He didn't dress it up. He said he was going to do better. I told him I believed him, and I meant it, not because he'd earned it yet, but because my father is a man who is slow to see things and tells the truth once he does. Derek and Sasha found a house. They found it 6 weeks after the Sunday meeting, in a neighborhood 20 minutes from me, a 3-bedroom with a yard and a school district that was genuinely good. They got there by doing what anyone does when the cushion is removed. They looked harder, they made compromises, they accepted what they could afford rather than what they'd hoped for. The kids are settled. Lily likes her new school. The twins are 4 and resilient in the way 4-year-olds are, which is completely and immediately. Derek and I had dinner in October, just the 2 of us. He brought a bottle of wine and we sat at my dining room table, and for a long time neither of us said anything hard. Then he said he had thought about the second page a lot. He said he hadn't known he'd been carried. He said that sounded like an excuse, and maybe it was, but he wanted me to know he was aware of it now. I said that awareness was a reasonable place to start. He said he was going to pay me back the loan, not all at once, but something each month. I told him he didn't have to. He said he wanted to. I said okay. That was the whole conversation about it. Sometimes the most important things are the ones that don't need more words. Patricia closed my file in November. She said my documentation was the best she'd seen from a non-attorney, and she said it as a compliment, and I took it as one. I refinished the back deck in November, alone on a Saturday, with a cup of coffee and a podcast, and the particular satisfaction of a person who knows every inch of what belongs to them. Here is what I want to say to you before I go. I am not a revenge person. I want to be clear about that because this channel is called Silent Drama, and there is a version of this story that is about winning or about watching people get what they deserve, and that's not actually what happened. What happened was quieter and more important than that. What happened was that I stopped letting the people who loved me pretend that love and entitlement were the same thing. My family looked at what I'd built, and they saw a solution to someone else's problem. Not because they were malicious, but because that is what happens when you spend a lifetime being the practical one, the capable one, the one who figures it out. You train the people around you to see your life as a resource rather than a life. You do it with your silence, your reliability, your refusal to ask for what you need. You do it by being so consistently okay that no one ever has to wonder if you're okay. I was not always okay. I was building something because I had to build something myself, because no one was going to build it for me, and I did it and I am proud of it. But somewhere in the building, I let the building become the whole story. And when someone finally asked me to hand the building over, I understood that the time had come for the story to change. 3 copies of a folder, a dining room table, numbers that had never been on a page before. That's all it was. The house is still mine. I am standing in it right now. In the kitchen I painted twice before I got the color right, looking out at the garden I planted in the spring, the oak trees dropping their leaves in the backyard like they've been doing since before I got here and will keep doing long after. No one told me to be strong. I just was. And the day I finally stopped performing that strength for people who had confused it for consent was the day I learned what quiet dignity actually costs. It costs exactly 1 uncomfortable Sunday afternoon and a folder with 3 pages in it. That's my story. If you are the capable one in your family, the practical one, the one who figures it out, I want you to sit with this tonight. Capable is not a synonym for available. And the people who benefit from your capability are not always the best judges of what you owe them. Drop a comment and tell me if you've ever been handed someone else's emergency and told it was your responsibility. Subscribe if you want to stay, because next week I have another story about someone who was asked to disappear quietly and decided, after a very long time, not to. I'll see you in the next one.